Dealer Tech Tuesdays is brought to you by VTech Dealer IT, guaranteeing your dealership premier reliability, stability, and customer support. Transform your Tuesdays into a powerhouse of growth. Contact us at www.vtechdealerit.com. Welcome to the Dealer Tech Tuesdays podcast. Crystal Massie is an automotive executive with 28 plus years driving performance, operations, and customer growth. She has led across every area of the dealership operations and is known for building strong teams, improving processes, and earning long-term trust. An NADA graduate and executive MBA candidate, she leads with one belief: there's enough sunshine for everyone. Let's begin. Crystal, how are you?
I'm great. Yourself, John?
Good. Can't complain. Jeannie Reitelbach's a very important member of our team. She's our chief brand officer, and she said, you have to talk to Crystal because we have a lot of these side conversations and picking each other's brains on people and culture, and just reading a little bit about you. I was really fascinated about how you look at leadership and that leadership style in the dealership space. And I wanted to, bring you on to the Dealer Tech Tuesdays podcast. We talk about culture and leadership and technology in the automotive business. And when I kind of get your take and your story, I think it's important to highlight people's stories. And you've been in the business for almost 30 years. What was it like kind of growing up in this business? You don't have as much gray hair as I do, but it sounds like you started young.
I have a really good stylist.
So how did you get involved with this industry, this wacky industry of ours?
Happenstance, as a lot of people would say. So back in the 90s, I relocated from the mountains of West Virginia because I was determined that at 17, I had life figured out and I could go out into the real world.
Okay.
Yeah, wouldn't recommend it. So I married a Marine and moved far away from home, about 8 hours from home, no home phone and no job and really no plan. But by the grace of God, I had 3 opportunities. I interviewed 3 different places. I was offered 3 jobs. And, quite honestly, for whatever reason, I chose automotive. I don't know that there was a whole lot of thought behind it. But I would tell you, after I had a little taste, I was in love and I wanted to learn and show up every day and get a little bit better.
And I could imagine, I'm a veteran myself, and I know spouses serve in a huge capacity. And so thank you for taking on that burden for our country. I think it's very
Likewise.
important.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, it's very, very, very important, especially that timeline. That must have been kind of wild with the automotive schedule plus a military schedule. How did you guys balance that?
I don't know that there was a lot of balance. There were a lot of hothead moments, which is funny because if you would meet my husband and I, we're both very even kill. We don't get rattled by much, but maybe that was something that came in time. But early on, I can remember, a lot of emotion and feeling like we were second fiddle to whatever, was going on, with the Marine Corps. If they wanted you to have a wife, they would have issued you one. You've heard all these like crazy things. But I would say it was a really good life. It was one that gave our family opportunity to grow, discipline. Obviously, the financial burden is not there. At the beginning, it's consistent. It's a small paycheck, but it comes every month.
Yeah.
So there wasn't that volatility that maybe we would see in the automotive industry. And when I first started, I was hourly. So
Okay.
we at least knew what to expect. You knew to live beyond your means would get you in trouble, so you just stayed within those bounds.
Yeah, that's very kind of contrarian thought process in the automotive business. It's like get into a super high car payment and then sell your way out of the hole, right? Yeah, it's and then I think in the car businesses, if we wanted you to have a husband, we would have hired one for you. that whole concept of just that balance, which doesn't necessarily exist, but it you've progressed, and how did you get into the like, what was the first position that you had in the business?
So my first position was actually a receptionist in the body shop.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
incredible.
it
And
was
just
very
working your way
interesting.
working your way through and understanding, you must have a understanding of the organization that goes just beyond logic.
There's definitely a depth and breadth that comes with that.
Okay.
Part of it's survival, right? So you have to
That
learn so you can survive. But there's another part that was just curiosity.
mm,
And I knew that if I showed up every day and just had the determination to learn a little bit more, that there was a lot more to learn, and there still is. I mean, I'm 30 years in, and I know that there's a ton. So I get on like Clubhouse every morning, and I usually just listen. I don't participate in the conversation. I absorb. I take what matters to me, and what doesn't. I just kind of let it fall to the wayside, and some of these other resources that we didn't have, LinkedIn and all of these other really great outlets, that we have for learning that, quite honestly wasn't available in the 90s.
yeah, and it's a lot of, kung fuing your way through leadership styles and going to trainings. And, early in your career, what is do you can you identify kind of any pivotal moments that you're like, man, this changed the way that I look at things? But, with that base of natural curiosity, I think is a superpower that's underexplored by many people.
I think every time I moved into a new role, I had a resurgence of wanting to learn, a
Okay.
little more. So um, I joke and say that they didn't find anything I was good at, so they just kept moving me, which wasn't really, the case. But it gave me the opportunity to um, adapt and overcome, kind of back to the military standard. But beyond that, it gave me the opportunity to help solve things, to systemize, to introduce logic that maybe wasn't
Okay.
there previously.
What Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. How did you come to that realization is like, is that just a natural gift that you have to just like, this doesn't make sense. We got to fix this and make this a system. It's like, how did you approach the system thinking?
So I do think that that's innate. I think I was born with that. And I've listened to you on some of these podcasts. I think you also have that gene.
Mm.
Would that be true, John?
Yeah.
Like you're always
Yeah.
looking at a way to systemize,
Yep.
perfect, find efficiencies.
Yeah.
So I think part of that was definitely just ingrained, early
Mm.
on in life. But beyond that, finding subject matter experts, coming alongside, learning what you can. I've said this on other podcasts, but think that it's really important um, to really hone in on vendors and their knowledge, where some people see it as a burden. I always saw it as a gift.
Mm.
If there was someone that I had an opportunity to work with, whether it was DMS, CRM, whatever that was, if I had the opportunity to absorb part of their knowledge and apply it to our organization, and I knew all levels of the organization to where if something were implemented, I would know how it would affect other departments. So it wasn't just that silo that I was working on. I knew that there was an implication on the other side where it may make it more difficult for a salesperson or a service advisor, and figuring out how to remove those friction points
Mm.
and just make it um, more enjoyable.
Yeah, a lot of the brain damage, and you're man, you're speaking my language, right? So the how do we remove the excuses and the resistance, and like, the talk about efficiency a lot is like effective rate. It's like, how do we increase our effectiveness? That we ease of movement, that things are happen consistently at a high degree over long periods of time. And it sounds you from and I love this perspective, is that to say, I understand the ecosystem. Like, I understand the if you push down here, there's other pieces that are going to go up, and it's going to affect, and it's going to, the caterpillar effect in the organization. If you buy a bunch of cars, then that's going to have, get ready, or you're going to have those inspected, and you're going to have to, that changes the dynamic in the whole organization. Cash flow, how that works with cash flow management, and all of this stuff has things aren't in silos necessarily. And you see GMs that don't understand the ecosystem, and you have that superpower that you not only understand it, but you lived it, and you understand, not even understand, it's like you intuitively know, there's a knowing there.
I would have a friend, that was younger in the business. She would say, how did you know that? How did you know that was gonna happen?" Said, "It's chess, not checkers." After you've
Mhm.
played it a few times, you anticipate, that next move, which I'm not a great chess player, so please don't try to speak chess to me. I'm the one in our family that really can't play. A board sits out at all times, but, uh, I really think that it's important to take others and the effects, into account when you're making those decisions.
And so, did you have a methodology of, like, getting early consensus or getting everybody bought in? You seem like that type of person that would be like, "If we're gonna make a big decision, we're gonna bring in the key players into this thing so everybody understands what it's gonna look like."
I think it's always important that everybody have a voice, even if you don't adopt whatever it is that they're sharing, because sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes you can say, "We've tried that and it didn't work. But here's the reason why I appreciate the input." Or now's not the right time for that table, then we'll come back to it. But it is very important that everybody have their fingerprints on something. Because if not, then you have the individuals, within an organization that may submarine what it is that you're working on. They pull it down. And I don't even know that it's intentionally. They just don't put forth their full effort and their talents to move it forward. And how much easier is it if we're all going the same direction?
Yeah, the malicious compliance that happens in an organization. It's like, man, they'll be like, "Yeah, I'm doing it," and then you see when they're actually, what parts are you doing? And you dive into that, really can scuttle or um, kill an idea or an initiative at its early stages when it's most vulnerable.
I agree with that. And I often say it's not the leader that's the most important. It's really the first follower. So the first person that comes alongside you and they're excited about the idea, that's the person that really needs more of the credit, for that project. Because then others, want to come across and support, as well.
And how did you identify that person early on in the process?
I think you can tell. I think you can tell when you're sitting in a room, you can see mannerisms, the crossed arms, slouched body, and things like that. You're like, okay, we're going to have to break through that one. But when you have the person that's leaning in, asking questions, um, expressing their desire, to learn more as well, I, I think they self identify oftentimes.
And would you call that person your champion of that initiative to say, "Hey, that you're gonna be the champion of this thing"?
I actually use the word champion all the time. For instance, um, when we brought in Tekion CRM, the dealership that I was in. So when I speak today, I'm not speaking on behalf of that store, but I'm going to speak on behalf of my experiences. When we brought Tekion in a CRM capacity, there were a couple of individuals on the sales floor that were more fluent and they adopted um, the software much faster. So they became the champions because they were the ones that they were going to live in that every day. They were going to have the real world application. And a lot of times it's easier to ask your peer how to do something rather than a supervisor because you don't want to express vulnerability. And I feel like in automotive, even more so, people don't like to ask questions because it makes them feel vulnerable.
Does that come from the inherent kind of competition between salespeople, that they're competing against each other so they don't wanna share the secrets? Or is that something that everybody, you can kinda get over that siloing of individuals to compete against each other, that there's that scarcity mindset?
I don't think you see that as much anymore. I've definitely lived through different seasons. Earlier on in my career, I think it was uh, more competitive where people felt like they had the secret sauce, and didn't want to share it. But as these resources have evolved, I mean, they are available. Ask ChatGPT something you can go back and forth and negotiate a car deal, to sharpen your skills.
Yeah.
Things such as that, I believe, have made it easier for sales associates and other frontline individuals to ask questions of one another and share resources. But I think there's still a human nature that you you don't want to ask as many questions because you want to appear that, you're in control of the subject matter.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, how do you how do you get that collaboration, everybody rowing in the same direction? Like that is a skill in itself, right? To say, how can we get the synergy and get everybody talking? And I think one of them is based in fear and based in lack and being out of alignment, and then one based in alignment, that's based in abundance, that's based in that positive mental attitude, that PMA, right? That doesn't necessarily grow on trees. And like you were talking about seasonality, a season can really change that. So everybody's like, oh, the market's changing and everybody's what's happening and who moved my cheese and that whole concept. How would you kind of intervene as a leader in the organization to change that mindset, to say, hey guys, let's get our get let's get everybody rowing in the same direction?
I think part of that is asking good questions and then actually listening when people share, the answer. Um, Getting everybody moving in the same direction sometimes requires you to move as well. Perhaps you didn't have the best game plan, going into it, and being the leader that's humble enough to say, I didn't have that dialed in quite right. My apologies. How could we better, serve the client? How could we better serve one another? And then refactor accordingly.
I think, I saw this belief that you have, that there's enough sunshine for everyone. That kind of translates into anything. You can put that into, there's enough, just having that attitude of there's enough sunshine for everybody is such a cool way to look at things. There's enough leads. There's enough opportunity. There's enough for everybody. And how did you approach and how did you reach that conclusion? Or was that something that you always had from the get-go?
So, in all transparency, I've always been a people builder. That's something that, I really have honed in on, enjoyed the enough sunshine for everyone. The thing that took me a little longer to learn was that included me, because I would set myself um, outside of the equation oftentimes as a young leader or a young professional, to where I would sacrifice to a fault. And then as I learned to be more confident in my choices and my leadership, I also learned that that was making me a better leader, to be somewhat self-serving in certain ways, because you can put yourself so far back that you, I don't want to say you start to resent the system, that sort of thing,
Yeah.
but you don't even realize it. You
Yeah.
don't even realize that it's happening.
Yeah. It's like
But I
pouring from a
really,
full
really,
cup, that concept
yes,
of pouring from a full cup, not from an empty one.
that is so true. And just continuing to celebrate collective wins.
Mm,
So the enough sunshine, you had it right. You had it right from the beginning. That's the reason that I share that motto. Quite honestly, I don't know that this is the appropriate time, but I actually have a small tattoo. You
oh,
can't really
that's
see it.
cool.
It
I love
says
that.
enough and it has the sun. So
I
if
love
your
that.
life motto isn't tattooed on you, that no, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
You're
Um,
fully committed. I love that. I
I
love
am
that.
committed.
I love that.
And it is leading from a spirit of abundance
Mm,
and not a spirit of scarcity. I heard you use the word scarcity, earlier, within this podcast. And I think that that's incredibly important, because when you lead from a spirit of scarcity, the first part of that word says scared, right? You're scared
yeah.
to make decisions. You're scared to commit. Scarcity says that there's not enough. There's not an abundance. And
Yeah.
there's so many opportunities, whether that's in retail automotive or, technology companies. I've never seen technology moving so fast. Like,
Yeah.
today's the slowest it's ever going to be, right? It's always going to be faster the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think that's leading with the heart, more than anything, is that really seeing that it's leading with the heart, not necessarily leading with that scarcity mindset or the pain, or leading from, what bucket are you pulling from? And there's nothing that can kill a great organization faster than a lot of people with, the poor me mentality tape running on everybody, running on everybody. And we talk about this on Clubhouse a lot. I know you're in the rooms and saying, the fish rots from the head down, right? We talk about that on a regular basis. If you set the tempo and you almost attract people that are of that mindset, that have this can-do attitude. They don't have, and I'm going to use a cuss word, but the itty bitty shitty committee running. That's my mom's phrase, right? Like, what's your self-talk look like? It's like, if you projected your self-talk out, would you be appalled that people would review that tape, or would you say, no, actually, this person talks about themselves really kindly, and they take care of themselves, and they can they're their own biggest coach, or their own biggest cheerleader. And then that poison infiltrates an organization quickly, to say, how do you stop that? How do you go through and attract more people that are of that ilk? And you probably have, or my suspicion is that you have a keen eye for identifying people that are like that you can say, yeah, this person comes from a place of sunshine and not from a place of darkness, right? To use your terminology.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely would say I'm a really good judge of character.
Mm,
You were talking about Jeannie earlier, hold her
yeah.
in high regard. And when she said, you need to get on this podcast with John Acosta, I was all in because she recommended it, quite
No,
honestly. And
she.
now I did go out and read about you thereafter. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm totally excited, about the opportunity. But being someone who can kind of detect those things early on. And I think part of that comes with core value testing. As
Mm,
you're interviewing in an organization, it's one thing to have your core values that are posted on a wall, it's another to actually govern by them and to vet people by asking questions. One of the things that we had was embrace a competitive spirit. So when I was in an interview, I would say something like, John, looking forward in 1 year, where do you see yourself? What would you consider to be a success? I would phrase it obviously
mm.
better than that, and it would be a more natural delivery, but making sure that they could see beyond that moment, right? Is this a job? Are you just coming in to get a paycheck? Or are you actually already thinking about this as a career? If you had the opportunity, are you excited?
Yeah, that really sets up, if they can think in a larger. I think fear sets our vision to, like, I need to get this job, not to say this is a movement this is a strategic movement that I'm going to do for a long period of time. And if they can't even really come up with a question or an answer to what that is, or a question back to go back and forth, you kind of see them, that they're narrowing their scope of focus to the right now, which is, I think that's, you can't see the sunshine if if your head's down, right? Like, just to kind of, to use that phrase, you can't even see what the future is going to look like. If that's really smart. What other indicators you have of people kind of not being in the right alignment, or being in the right mindset, or like those early detection signals that happen with people?
I mean, I often think if money, is the sole focus, that's usually very telling. Now, I think that it's important. I mean, we're all, it's a for-profit organization. Yeah, that's what we're trying to do, right? I mean, that's why we're all in retail, automotive, or in business, is to make money, which is incredibly important. But there's also other things that come along with that. Self-development,
Mm,
asking those questions early on. What are the opportunities? What are the opportunities beyond right now? And quite honestly, since I've been back in the job market, that's been one of the things for me. I don't want to relocate, but as I'm, having discussions with people, I want to know beyond that moment, beyond this
mm.
job description, what does this look like? Because I want a high sense of ownership. Like, I want to know that I'm empowered to make decisions as long as it's within my realm of um, possibility, right? Like, if it's something that I'm the subject matter expert, like, you trust me enough. If you hire me into this organization, are you good if I make these decisions, going forward? Or is it really that I'm just an order taker and a paper pusher? Because that's different. And
Yeah,
in
that you have.
short term, that's one thing. You can do that on a project base, but not long term adoption. Or
Yeah,
I
because,
can't do that.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And as a general manager, as a leader of an organization, you really set the tone and the pace for the organization, and that takes time to build that. It takes time to develop those things, and coming into an organization and seeing, like that systems thinking is like, this doesn't make any sense. And to have that view of the ecosystem, if I change this, then this changes, and have the ability to think about those secondary and tertiary effects that happen in an organization. And I love how you approach that. How, if you told somebody about this and you were kind of saying, hey, start thinking in systems, how would you, kind of an example, can you give me an example of something that you fixed that lacked logic, that you said, hey, this is something that we used to complain about all the time, and now we put it into the flow category of things. How do you approach that problem solving strategy?
So you mentioned cash flow, earlier, which was something that I was actually very good at when I was in the accounting sector um, of the organization, which was the duration, of my time
Mm,
in retail automotive. But actually systemizing things to where you didn't have the ebb and flow, the volatility that you had to worry about moving from cash reserves and things like that. So you actually were able to operate the business out of an operating account, without having to rely on other lines, of income. So making sure that STIPs were satisfied and deals were funded. So that money was in the organization before, payments were due out. So really systemizing things, and then um, making sure that people were accountable to a time frame. You don't want to leave CIT out there for, 2 or 3
yeah,
weeks, and your floor plan payoffs due in, 5 to 7 days, depending on how you're set up with the lender, because that creates great cash strains, like, very quickly. I mean, like, millions of dollar swings. You have one good
yeah,
weekend and you're in trouble.
yeah.
Which is funny because cash flow is, when an organization is slower, it's much simpler. Cash flow is simple when there's no churn.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But whenever business is good, that's when cash flow is like, okay, we need to figure this out. How do we make sure that our receivables are coming in faster than, the money is going out? So that
Yeah,
would be one
especially when,
example.
if you're selling volume, that how many cars you're buying and how many payoffs you're having, like cash dries up very, very quickly, and not a lot of people really have that understanding of what that looks like, and that you have to build those coffers over time.
Well, and in a world where you're having to buy vehicles from private party,
Mhm.
and you don't know when those opportunities will arise, right? I mean, you don't know that you're going to buy 6 or 7 off the service drive this week because it just set up and things were glorious, and that's wonderful because you need it for inventory. But there's a really big swing,
Yeah,
in cash
how
again.
fast a $500,000 can walk out of the organization, you know? Yeah, you got those vehicles, but you gotta get them ready, you gotta get them, you gotta get them to the front line. It becomes, it really is an ecosystem. I think that's the right way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me, from coming, how's that shift been from being in the accounting department to being to the GM seat? How did you adapt to that? How did you, what did you learn, or what um what's that phrase, like, what darlings did you have to kill? It's like these ideas that he's like, well, if I was doing it, I would do it this way, right? And was there any hard realizations that you came into when shifting different positions in the organization?
Um, I would say um, marketing became incredibly important.
Mm,
With that, obviously, when you start looking through the CRM and the number of mouths that you have to feed, the number of families that are depending on you, you need to make sure that they have as many opportunities to bat, as necessary.
okay.
So that's incredibly important. It definitely, I looked at it more um, as an investment rather than an expense,
Mm, okay.
if that makes sense.
Okay.
So when you're looking at it just from the balance sheet perspective and you're comparing it to, um, some of the other expenses and comparing it to your peers, you're like, "Oh, yeah, we need to cut marketing budget, or we need to bring this down or more in alignment." And then when you look at it from the other side, it's we just need to spend it faster, or not faster, we need to spend it wiser. We need to make
Mm.
sure that, the throughput matches the investment. So actually looking at the number of leads, the number of opportunities, minimizing duplications, because sometimes you realize that it's not an authentic lead and you've seen the person's name, multiple times. So,
And that everybody's claiming it. It's like, "Oh, that lead came from us," and, like, "This lead came from 7 different lead sources," you know?
and maybe they all played a part in it. That's the truth, because
Yeah.
as adults, we have to hear things 7 times before we hear it once. So,
Mhm.
maybe we have to see it in all those regards, but figuring out what makes most sense and maximizing, co-op dollars, to kind of minimize the expense side and maximize the opportunities. So I think it's all just a balance, regardless
Yeah.
of titles or, uh, roles. It's just finding a balance. And as you say, ecosystem, just finding that to where
Yeah.
you don't have a situation where the expenses are too high and the opportunities are too low.
Yeah, and the better deployment of that same dollar, right, to be as effective as possible and converting that customer. Yeah, I mean, so many of it, and it's such a logical way of looking at it. It's like there's some of the variable positions are full of magical thinking, and then suddenly they're blowing people out quickly because it's not working, and we have to do the results immediately and what that looks like, and just I think there's a lot of wisdom and a logical approach to this to say what's working, what's not working. Let's get to the basics of it and figure out what we're going to pour gas into before we just kind of fix everything and then we don't know what's working and what's not working.
And sometimes when something's not working, realize it's because you're not working, right? It's not always the tool's problem. When you get in and you have managers that haven't, logged into something for a month, or, they're not setting something up, correctly before you pull the ripcord, to leave, let's make sure that we've actually exhausted it. Because I would say your team also loses confidence when you do that, when you start to, um, pull things away and replace them with others, quickly. They're like, okay, here we go, flavor of the month, right? I refer to it as
Yeah.
stickiness. You have to find things that work, and then, make sure you have stickiness, within it, which is maybe not the most scientific term, but I think it's incredibly important from a leadership position for your employees to see that, you're not fickle and you're not just going to change course. You're actually going to dig in and figure out
Mm.
what needs to be done for success.
I think stickiness is the right term. That's like the, where we work in a highly illogical industry, right? There's not, we had a GM of a ultra luxury store in San Francisco. And it's like, there's no reason why somebody would buy a $2 million car. There's no logic to that, right? There's no, we live in a highly illogical industry, right? There's just no reason for that. And so we Sherpa people through the second most important purchase that they make in their life. It may be the first most important purchase and the only, depending on where you are financially, maybe the most
Well,
important
and
financial.
in a military community, that's oftentimes the case.
Yeah. That's like your home is your vehicle. Your vehicle is your home. I knew that when I was in the military, a lot of guys would be like, no, I got my truck. And then they'll, rent someplace or do some other place and be in some crappy apartment complex. And I lived in many of them. And my vehicle was my refuge, to go from one place to another. And some people spent their whole paycheck on, brand new 1500 Silverado at 26%, right? Because they didn't have any credit, whatever it looks like. But it does become, that process where you're navigating the highly illogical, right? The highly emotional aspects of the business.
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah. And Crystal, how did you approach the debits and credits? Like, yeah, really, I'm fascinated by that transition from really hard numbers into making processes, making systems, making um, taking the logic out of the variable side, right? That can be fluctuating, right? Can be up and down. And how did you approach that? Like, did you have a past in that side of things, and then you pulled from that well to go into variable side, or how did that transition happen?
Quite honestly, if you were to look at my background, it's very non-traditional
Okay.
from an automotive perspective. So I started in the collision center, supported our service and parts department as needed, whether that was cashier, um, service advisor type position from a repetitive standpoint, maybe for internal ROs, that sort of thing. Um, I held an executive assistant role for several years, which I really enjoyed, and I think that was probably really um, where I thought this business is incredibly intriguing. It's rewarding, and opportunities are there. I just have to figure out how that's going to work out for me. And then I had an opportunity to move within our accounting office and held every role except for title clerk. I always say I couldn't do that one because there's like so much repetition. Like I need different to stay intrigued. Like I need some element of surprise and delight. Something surprises you and you're like, oh, how's this going to work? And then you figure it out and then you're like, oh, that was kind of fun, for lack of better words. That was kind of fun. Now, what can we fix? Um, but with that, I just really supported operationally whatever was needed within the organization. So let's just remove titles. If there was a project, it really didn't matter what it was. If there was technology install, UVI, Techion, Kirby, you name it, any of those, as they came into the organization, I attached to the project.
Mm.
And it was really important to me that we succeed. So we were very, very big pioneers when it came to things. We never wanted to be the guinea pig, but we always wanted to be, first to bat if something made sense. So I had the pleasure of, doing that within the organization. It's a great organization. Just because I'm not there doesn't, um, mean that they won't succeed, and it doesn't mean that I won't succeed. So this week, I actually cannonballed into an LLC, John. I am
Okay.
now a freelance person and doing some project work, as needed. So if somebody needs something, they're going to install software, they need to systemize something, and they need somebody that understands it. That's what I want to do. So more project based. I'm not going to call myself a consultant because I feel like there are a lot of those in our space, and the depth of what they know is, you'll have somebody that's like really, really good fixed ops and that's their thing, or really good variable. And I may not have the depth quite as deep as some of those individuals, but I do have the breadth to know across the organization, how that will work. And I think I just have a really unique vantage point, to be able to add some value.
Yeah, especially like understanding every aspect of the business. It sounds like you from your experience, you really know the ecosystem of a dealership. And to say, what is it that they say about experiences? You get it the day after you need it. It's like yeah, I think I was talking today on Clubhouse about DMS change. It's like that is
Mm,
that is a tough, I've got a book about, business and it's information business systems for management. And it talks about the project management of changing an ERP. And ERP is basically what a DMS is, right? It's the same thing. If you go to Oracle, SAP, in our industry, we call it CDK, Reynolds and Reynolds, Techion, whatever.
mhm,
And it takes 2 years of planning to do a change, DMS change. You have to have a champion. You have to get all the buy-in from everybody that's in the organization. You have to say, hey guys, we're going to make a big change, but it's going to help us in the future. And that malicious compliance comes in, and people are they're updating their resume in the background because whether what the temperament of the organization looks like is like, this is going to be a crap show, right? It's going to be a disaster, or it's going to be highly executed and it's going to make all of us better. And the culture, temperament, texture of the organization all play into those factors of how can you get everybody on board? How can you tell everybody what a good job looks like? How can people be champions of their area? How can you calm that fear? How can you say these are the planning meetings? There's one throat to choke. There's one project manager for the organization that creates the everybody rowing in the right direction. That is a skill that is
That was
worth
that
its
person.
weight in
Yeah,
gold. Yes, exactly. That's what we're talking about, right? That's you.
that's
And
right.
that the person that can do that is extraordinarily powerful because organizations really suffer through that. They are balancing, selling cars and servicing vehicles and doing that stuff, and they're really good at it. They may be a great used car manager. They may be a great variable guy or gal. They may be a great, BDC manager, but they don't understand how change management works and how to see around corners is what I like to look at. It's like we're going to have a problem there, and your experience of the ecosystem really gives that perspective, which is you can't put a price on that.
And for me, it was fun. So, yeah, most people would shy away from that, but it was once again an opportunity to learn something new.
Well, you sound like a problem solver and somebody that approaches things with curiosity. So, that's like that personality trait. If you could bottle that and sell it, you'd be extraordinarily extraordinarily wealthy, right? To
We'll
say, I
call it
know,
enough. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a superpower to have the ability to do that and say this is how I'm going to approach something and understand it as a system, as an ecosystem that you're moving levers on. Some people throw kind of a DMS change just into it and then everything becomes a problem. And I think talking about that is very much needed because the thing that's going to be constant in this industry is change. It's the only thing that I know is constant. We went to digital retailing. We went into, we've gone into meta, into the pretend universe of technology. We've gone into all these things have changed. The only thing that's constant is human beings changing, how they change, how they do things, how they acquire vehicles, get really good at change. And I think you've developed that skill set over the last 30 years.
That sounds like a really big number when you say it. Yes, thank you.
But I mean, that's what that is, right? You know the forest for the trees because you've seen a thing or two. And you got the benefit that you started early, right? You have people that got into this industry and don't have half of the experience that you have, which is really powerful thing to know. Like really having an industry expert in your on your side, helping you navigate through these things that understands how systems work is it's a it's a it's an effective tool.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Crystal, if you were talking to your younger self, what would you say? What kind of books would you recommend to you at just getting into the industry? What would you say? What are the books that most impacted you? To say, read this one now. if you went back through in time and you had a time machine to do that.
Hmm, there's so many. Um, I think one that I read more recently was Think and Grow Rich, the women's version by Sharon Lechter, which, as I understand it, has a lot of similarities to the original, but she studied, several successful females, throughout and quotes several. And one of those quotes that I took from that book was, I'm not for women only, but I am for women also. And I think that young people need to hear that. Young females need to hear that there's room, there's space, in the organization, and don't be discouraged and don't let people hurt your feelings.
Hmm.
Feelings are one of those things that we live in a very offended world. Don't be offended, by things easily. Um, that way you allow yourself to move forward. Other books, let's see. One that I frequently recommend is Smart Brevity.
Okay.
I was one that sometimes would go past the close, you know, being somebody that's analytical, you find out all the information. And I sense this from you too, John. You find out
Mm.
all the
Mhm.
information and you are ready for the debate or the discussion. Well, sometimes you don't need all that,
Yep.
right? You like
I'm gonna
on your
write that
third
one down.
statement, they're like, "Okay, I'm in," and then you just keep going, and you can't. And they're like,
Mhm.
"Okay, I've already told you, you had me on your side." So it's a very short read, but it's based on Axios. Some of the articles that they put out, just to keep things short. You know, smart brevity, so you're not curt, but you do get the point across. I think that was a
Mm.
valuable thing. Atomic Habits, and I know that that's one that's shared, often, but learning to systemize and layer things because in very busy lives, how do we get everything in? We're going to exercise, we're going to drink our water, we're going to eat nutritiously, have our vitamins, and have all that done and be dressed, you know, for work by
Yeah.
whatever, 7:30, 8 a.m. Oh, and we should speak to our family at some point, during that time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you think of things like that, finding those efficiencies to where you can do multiple things, at one time.
Mm. Yeah, the smart brevity, I'm gonna definitely do that. I have a tendency of being long-winded, so and going into the details and understanding it because I have a tendency of thinking out loud, right? To say it's like I'm exploring ideas as I'm talking, and this is what this podcast is why I'm like literally recording it so I can learn from smart people that have done some cool things and learn about that and put it into a process and put it into a system. This is my exploration of that curiosity.
Well, that seemed to work very well for you. So I
I
think that
appreciate that.
lifetime student of the business, mindset has served you really well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And so if you had to if you had to give some advice and so based on your experience as somebody that was undergoing a big change, a big challenge, a big project that they're coming up with, what would be the top three things that you say you have to do this?
So I'm going to liken it to something. We were talking about DMS. I think one of the first things you do is go in and remove things that you've ignored or put a band-aid on for years. Maybe you have accounts that are inactive. Instead of getting rid of them, you just type something like do not use. Yeah, like clean all that up. It definitely translates much better, as you migrate over to the new setup. Um, Same thing for, like your service department. And if you have a body shop, those labor ops, if you have labor ops out there that you're not using, clean that up. Uh, so I think that's step one, like get your house in order. And if that's
Mm,
something that you can't do, maybe somebody like me, could help you clean that up. You get rid of some of those things. Um, I do think that discussing with your team, what the intent is, the reason that you're looking at this new project, airing, those concerns, out in the open and not just being dismissive that, somebody's a curmudgeon and they just won't adopt it. I
mm,
think that that's really important. The open and honest, communication, really that needs to be number one, um, because you're going to need those experts, to help you remove those other things. And then dialogue, with your vendor partner, on the other side, and make sure that you know what the clear expectations are and the timeline, because it's really easy to set in these meetings and they say, oh, yeah, yeah, go live. Yeah, it's easy, nothing on your end. You'll be live in 2 weeks. Don't believe, ask lots of questions and, beyond whatever it is that you're purchasing or considering, how do you work that into your ecosystem, to use John's word again, overall? Like, how does this fit into our organization beyond just this piece? Like, at what point of the process are we going to bring this back into play? Is it duplicative anywhere? I think asking a lot of those, really important questions from the vendor partner perspective, is important.
to kind of give a summary of that is clean up your garbage, right? The garbage, the stuff that you have been ignoring for years, the do not use, the opcodes, everything that's been, the garbage that you have, right? The really second one is to have clear, consistent communication with your team and know their fears and know what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, what success looks like. And three, to have open, constant communication with your vendor and set the expectations clearly, right? That's if you did that and walk through people through that process, that it saves a lot of pain. And I know that pain is the thing that we want to be away from, and right, and we want to be on the other side of
Yes.
it, and that everything's working and everybody's on board and everything's and the organization is thriving. We want to get on the other side of it, and I think a lot of people avoid that pain because they don't have clarity on that. And Crystal, thank you for providing that context. I think it's extraordinarily powerful. And if people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
So LinkedIn is always a good option. Crystal, I always say just like the gym. And the last name is Massie, Massie. Beyond that, perspective shift automotive at gmail.com. So that's something that I've recently put in place. Like I said, this week. So this is all brand new venture, but um, it is above board. So I'm really excited. I referred to Jeannie as my dream weaver. She said, "You really have something special and you should consider, going to market." And that's not where my head was initially. Um, but I'm really glad that, I've taken that leap. So I'm
That's
ready to
beautiful.
celebrate some wins and help folks be successful.
And welcome to the entrepreneur side. It's a fun, wild ride. And if you ever need anything, we're here to help. We're here to support you. I love the way that you think, and I love the way that you approach things. That systems thinking is strong. There's just no other way to say it. It's really strong. It's the some of the best operators that I know think in systems, and I know you'll be very successful and in your future endeavors. So thank you very much, Crystal. I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation.
I agree. Pleasure meeting you officially.